Thank you for joining us. I'm Beverly Wemple. I am one of 3 co-PIs on this grant project that is bringing together academics and community stakeholders over this semester. And our broader project is called Science to Advance Freshwater Ecosystem and Community Resilience in the Appalachians, or SAFER app. And in a few minutes, we'll introduce today's speakers and how we'll lay out the discussion today. I want to just start by telling those of you who are joining us today that this effort today, the conversation today, and what we have been doing this semester in a set of monthly meetings is a planning effort, and I'll say a little bit more about that in just a minute, funded under a National Science Foundation brand new program called CHIRP, which is an acronym for a program referred to as Confronting Hazards, Impacts and Risk for a Resilient Planet. So this is a new funding program under the National Science Foundation, situated out of the Geosciences Directorate, with these 3 sort of prongs or pillars. One prong being to advance Earth system science, one being to build equitable community partnerships, and one being to advance solutions that increase resilience. And as my colleagues, Nico Zeg at West Virginia University and Rob Nicholas at Penn State University, and I were writing the proposal for this planning grant, we laid out a goal that what we wanted to do over this 2-year period was to work on developing capacity for the integration of flood risk prediction science. That's essentially the Earth system science piece. And nature-based solutions deployment that's responsive to community needs and builds resilience for highly vulnerable rural communities in mountain regions. And our goal was to use the Appalachian Mountains because all 3 of us at these universities are located in the Appalachian Mountain region. And before I turn the slides over to Nico, I'll say that this gathering and this National Science Foundation funded grant is a little bit different from a research grant in that it is a planning grant. So what we are trying to do under a planning grant is to build a community and to essentially work together to conceptualize, build a collaboration that's really aimed at formulating a plan for a future proposal. So rather than doing work, what we're doing is bringing people together in conversation to ask, are there some opportunities to work across our state universities and our stakeholder community to build up a larger proposal in the future? So I'll turn it over now to my colleague Nico Zeg at West Virginia University. He's going to lay out what we're going to do today.
Great. Thank you so much, Beverly. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I wanted to start today by acknowledging the ongoing and seemingly insurmountable challenges of the current flood reality across the region. You know, from the unprecedented flooding in the southern Appalachians last fall to floods in southern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky earlier this year, and zooming to this week, heavy rainfalls and catastrophic flooding that ripped through rural western Maryland, prompting rescues from roads and cars and homes and building. And this picture that's being shown is a picture from the, oh my gosh, I totally just blanked on the community, but a small middle school in Western Port, Maryland, where children actually had to be evacuated from their schools. And younger members of society are confronted with this tremendous uncertainty about what their future looks like, given these unprecedented changes. Beverly, if you could advance. In a recent paper that I co-authored, we surveyed and interviewed over 400 young adults from across the central and southern Appalachian region, and 30% of the participants believe that climate change is actually harming them now, and 52% believe that climate change poses formidable risks to them over the next 50 years. And planning by definition means to plan for something, which implies planning for the future. And given that the youth of today are our future business owners and leaders, parents and decision makers and voters, arguably they need to be part of our planning process today and need to be given the training opportunities to help solve these problems in the future. Advance. So our presenters today are going to share an example of how this is being done in West Virginia through a NOAA-funded environmental literacy program, preparing agents of change for tomorrow, building youth confidence and capacity for climate resilient futures in Appalachia. And the goal of this presentation, of sharing this presentation and project, is to stimulate conversation around education and workforce development across the Appalachians. Advance. Following a brief presentation by our speakers, who I'll introduce here shortly, we're going to have a discussion to better understand what your needs are in developing these sort of programs. As researchers who are accustomed to writing proposals that include education and workforce development, we want to work with you to bring funding, education, and training to the work that you're already doing. So in preparation for the discussion, we want to ask you 3 questions. Advance. What information do you need to advance flood resilience education? What are your educational and workforce training needs? And what sources of funding are available to support education and workforce development? Advance. So with that, I am pleased to introduce my colleagues, Megan Kruger and Kennedy Lawson, who will be presenting on the PACT project. Megan Kruger is one of the PIs on the PACT project, which is funded by the Environmental Literacy Program at NOAA. And she holds a Master's of Education, Environmental Education from Slippery Rock University, and presently is an evaluation and research specialist with the WVU Extension Service. And I think it's important to note that she's also concurrently working on her PhD in anthropology, studying disasters. And Kennedy Lawson holds a Master's of Art and Geography from WVU, and her master's research focused on evaluating existing youth resilience education programs and the development of the Resilience Ambassadors Program, which we're going to hear about here shortly. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Megan to introduce the PACT project.
Thanks, Nico. Let me get my slides pulled up. Okay. All good?
Yes, we can see them.
Okay, perfect. Yes. Thank you, Nico, for that introduction. And I'm happy to be here today talking about our project, PACT, Preparing Agents of Change for Tomorrow, Building Climate Resilient Futures in Appalachia. This project started about 3 years ago now, is when we had the idea of writing a proposal to NOAA. And one of our main catalysts for that was recent flooding events in West Virginia, particularly the 2016 flood that many West Virginians remember as one of the most deadliest floods we've had. Was about a 1,000-year flood, if I remember, Nico, and it caused significant damage. These are happening at a larger rate, as Nico was discussing, and this flood really woke a lot of people up to some of the major vulnerabilities that we have in West Virginia. And despite being one of the most flood-prone states, we have a significant lack of preparedness for these future challenges, as Nico was referring to. One of the most prominent is a lack of resilience plans for future flooding in the state. So our solution, one of our solutions, was to create this funding opportunity, to respond to this funding opportunity from NOAA for this project, Preparing Agents of Change for Tomorrow. And in essence, it's a comprehensive initiative to enhance climate resilience through youth education and engagement in West Virginia, funded through the Environmental Literacy Office at NOAA. And it's a cross-disciplinary partnership between Extension, WVU Mountain Hydrology Lab that Nico runs, and the WVU Center for Resilient Communities in the Geography Department that Kennedy works at. We spent a lot of time when we were writing the proposal trying to understand how we would move the needle on this, how we would prepare youth better for climate futures, uncertain climate futures, how to increase the resilience to flooding and disaster. And NOAA had some resources. We've had resources we've used in the past, and we kind of combine those to come up with a theoretical model of increasing youth self-efficacy around understanding floods, understanding vulnerabilities in their community, understanding how to plan for flooding, increasing their confidence in being a change maker in their community, increasing their confidence in the ability to even make a difference, and then layering all of that with a lens of hope. So inherently talking about disaster and climate change can be kind of scary for kids. So we wanted to make sure that all of this was lined with this idea of hope. And hope is intertwined into all of our lessons and all of our teachings. So these three things together, we hypothesized that would increase a youth's climate literacy and resilience. So we started there, and then we decided, okay, so how do the youth actually move through this? What do we even do with them? How do we build their self-efficacy? How do we build their confidence? What do we do? This is what we landed on. There's 3 tiers, as we call it, but they're really just kind of chapters or sections in their learning. Tier 1 is their entry point into our program. We again partnered with WVU Extension to use their kind of in-school programming model where they bring extension agents into the classroom to teach about various STEM subjects or learning. They have various curriculums. So initially we had this idea that we would follow that model. And in that first model, they would really just kind of increase their awareness of these topics, increase their awareness of climate change, increase their awareness of flooding in their community, and maybe even understand some of the vulnerabilities that their community faced. Then after they would complete this in-school portion, then they would move into this second iteration or second kind of more in-depth lesson workshop. And we were still trying to figure it out as we were going through all this. But what Kennedy will talk about later is this tier 2, community resilience ambassadors. And this is where they start actually doing. So the first tier, they're kind of being introduced and learning. And then the second tier, they actually are starting to practice what they learned by planning, map making, going out into the field, and making recommendations for their community. And then after they go through that, then they go through this final point of the project where they can use what they've done, what they've learned, and present it to community leaders, local government, their peers, their teachers, and really just try to put out all of that information that they learned. So what I will discuss in the next few minutes that I have left is what we did, what actually happened in our tier 1 in-school programming. So as of today, we've run this program 3 times in 2 different schools. And we've had this iterative process that started with curriculum development and piloting that original curriculum, evaluating that, refining the curriculum, piloting it again, and then finally kind of creating a final version and a guidebook and that is where we're at today. The lessons that we have are 5. There are 5 lessons which are used in 5 different iterations. So ideally, they would be done 5 different classroom sessions. Unit 1 is what are floods? And this unit is really just an introduction to floods and local waterways. So a lot of the students we've realized don't really understand the difference between a river flood and a flash flood, and even not aware of all the local waterways in their community. So we kind of talk about that. We talk about where they are situated in their watershed. We use some of the USGS resources like Streamer, where they can kind of map what's upstream of them, what's downstream of them. And it's really kind of fun, just exploratory lesson. And they kind of finish that with looking at a map of their community and trying to just think based on their lived experience, where they've seen flooding before. So we have them get sticky notes and put it on the maps and say, I've seen a flood happen at this restaurant, this bowling alley in my community, and this and that. And so we have them kind of do this exercise and try to start just thinking, where have they seen floods? Where do they think floods are most likely to happen in their community? Then the next day we go on to Unit 2, which is more a science-heavy lesson where we kind of start looking into the science behind flooding. So we kind of dive deeper into what's the difference between a riverine flood and a flash flood? Why is flooding getting worse? So we kind of do a longer conversation on linking temperature to precipitation changes and flooding, understanding how flash flooding isn't as predictable as riverine flooding, and kind of just getting their feet wet as far as understanding the climate-related impacts of changing weather, changing precipitation events, and so on and so forth. Unit 3 is now moving on, now that they have that background information of flooding, the different types of flooding. We start kind of introducing them to risks. So we do an introduction to mapping community flood risks. We talk about why communities are more vulnerable than other communities, what makes them vulnerable. We use a system called RAPT for them to put in their school or their home or wherever they're interested in looking and seeing what the map overlays they can play with on that RAPT system, which could include flooding vulnerability and some other of those social factors that could influence it. And we talk about, how do you know if a vulnerable population exists in your community and why is that? That is usually a really eye-opening lesson for them. They're like, wow, I really didn't realize all this. So after we get to that point, they're really starting to think, okay, why are you teaching me all this? Like, what are we doing with this? And that's when we move into lesson 4, which we start really giving them the resources they need to understand their own preparedness in their community and how they can be kind of an ambassador for preparedness in their families. So we talk about planning. What do you need to do to plan for a flood? What are some flood safety tips? What do you do if there's a flood warning versus a flood watch? And then we break it down into the before the flood, during a flood, and after the flood best practices. And we give them a checklist of things that they should go home and talk to their families about. Where would we meet? What would we do? What is our plan? And then they come back the next day and we wrap it all up with hope. And this was really important to us because we wanted to make sure they didn't leave us feeling disparaged or feeling unprepared or like that this was too big of a problem. We do a case study with them, and the Red Cross created this beautiful story map on the Kentucky floods of 2022, and they kind of went over their whole response. And there's personal stories in there of community resilience, of recovery. And so we have them go in and read that. And then they each take different sections and they talk about, oh, how did this person get through this? And what were the community impacts, but how did they overcome it? And then they take time to do a personal reflection at the end. So they think about, what would I do if I was in a flood? How would I help my community? We did collect evaluation data, and we asked them, what did you learn that surprised you? And these are some of the things that the youth said. They learned that the amount of people affected by the flood is way higher than they had thought, that they didn't realize there was so much flood damage in their state, and that they're really realizing that it's not just the flood that's the problem, it's how everything accumulates together that creates a bigger problem. So they're starting to connect those vulnerabilities to flood and understanding that it's more than just a flood, it's these inherent vulnerabilities that these communities are facing. And they also start thinking about who they would help. So they started connecting the dots, like, oh, if my neighbor is elderly, I probably should check on them because maybe they don't have technology that would alert them. Maybe I can help my family make an evacuation plan. And we did ask them kind of some pre and post questions as well, just to understand where they were before we started this 5 lessons and after. This one was asking them how they feel they could prepare for a disaster. And you can see the green is before and the orange is after. And so a lot of them kind of were in the neutral to disagree. They weren't really sure how to prepare ahead of a disaster. And then that kind of moved towards the right of the graph. After the program, we asked them, how they know if they live in a flood zone. This one had a big impact. A lot of them did not know how to check if they lived in a flood zone, versus after the program, a lot of them feel strongly that they can assess the risk in a flood zone. And we did ask them this question, which was kind of surprising. How much did they think the river near them impacts their day-to-day life? And you can see here that a lot of them thought none at all. Like, the river doesn't impact me. I don't really see it as a part of my day-to-day life. And after, they're starting to think, wow, it really is ingrained in my day-to-day life and it could impact me. And the last one I'll discuss is their ability to assess hourly rainfall changes. So we do this activity where they have to look at hourly data for precipitation over the course of 20 years. And so we spend a lot of time trying to get them to understand, where does this data even come from? And you can see here, a lot of them kind of had no clue, like, how to assess hourly rainfall changes ahead of time before, and now they're feeling more strongly that they can. So all of this was really reassuring and allowed us to kind of move to the next step, which was we created this teacher's guidebook. And this guidebook is a comprehensive document that goes through all the curriculum, all the lessons, all the attachments that anyone would need to teach these 5 lessons. Our graduate student, Faith, who's not on the call, created this for us. And our next step is to use this guidebook to do Train the Trainer. So we're hoping to have a Train the Trainer in the next year and a half, where we train teachers, extension agents, anyone that's interested on the curriculum, and provide some supplies. The good thing about this curriculum is it's relatively cheap to do. There's not a lot of supplies involved. So we think it'll be really accessible for anyone to kind of pick up and take in their classroom or take in their youth group and teach. So with that, I will pause, and I don't know if I'm at time or if I can answer questions, but thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Megan. We'll save the questions for part of our discourse later, just to jump into Kennedy's presentation.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nico, for the introduction, and Megan for going over some of the Tier 1 and the program in general. Super excited to be here today and talk a little bit more about the Resilience Ambassador portion of the PACT project. So this program was really rooted in the central question that you'll see on the screen, as we've discussed here. Flooding is a serious issue in West Virginia that communities are unprepared to face. So we really wanted to focus on the young and future generations of West Virginia being prepared to confront and adapt to this climatic reality, leading us to ask, how in West Virginia can we effectively increase the confidence and capacities of community members, specifically younger generations, to engage in flood risk reducing strategies and planning efforts? With this question in mind, the CRC set out to mobilize young agents of change to contribute to flood resilience building efforts, really focusing on flood vulnerability assessment in West Virginia by organizing and piloting a 3-day intensive training program called the Resilience Ambassador Program, or RAP. And this occurred in August of 2024. And at first, since this was our piloting of the program, we only were focusing on the geographic scale of Monongalia County, West Virginia, which is where WVU is located. And that summer, we were able to host 9 high school students between the ages of 15 and 17 who attended 2 public high schools, so Morgantown High School and University High School. And really, the confidence building started in the recruitment process as we conducted outreach in classrooms, at extracurriculars, or in clubs. Just by asking the students, what do you love about your community? I know a lot of the time entryways into programs can kind of serve as children's understanding of their role in it. So we really wanted them to know that they didn't need to be super interested in science or in flooding or have all this perceived as expert knowledge, but just had to come in with a love and care for their community, to invite them to be a part of this conversation around flooding, even if they feel like they didn't know necessarily a lot. And the purpose of this piloted of the program was to really focus on experimenting and honing the pedagogical approach of the Resilience Ambassador program, because we were utilizing some CRC created curriculum, which is titled Preparing for Tomorrow. And also in Preparing for Tomorrow, there's a CRC created tool, which is the Flood Vulnerability Assessment Wheel. And I'm going to get into those a little deeper in a moment here. But really, the overarching goal was to build participants' knowledge, capabilities, capacities, and skill sets to prepare them to contribute to flood vulnerability assessment and resiliency planning at the local level. So what's really unique about the tools that were created out of the CRC is that we adopted a distinctive approach to what might be typically seen in education around flooding. And we were really focused on bringing in mapping, redefining the expert, and developing capacity. So highlighting mapping processes such as mental mapping, community mapping, collaborative mapping in groups, and highlighting places of meaning in the community as an entryway where students were able to speak to some places they love, places where their families spend time. And then we were able to use that to kind of integrate this redefining of the expert. Flooding is perceived as a highly scientific topic of study, yet by redefining the expert, we invited the perspective of high school students as community members and invited them to recognize their experiences and knowledge are just as important to the data that they were going to be interacting with later in the program. And through the program, they were able to learn about the complexities of how flood vulnerability can be assessed with their peers by increasing data literacy, by engaging with data and information pertaining to flood vulnerability, while also still inviting personal experiences and knowledge that could be utilized to recognize some gaps in the data or information they were engaging with. And then also, we had a walking tour where students were able to get outside out of the classroom and increase spatial awareness by walking through community areas and identify some tangible examples of flood vulnerability they were seeing. And then at the end, they kind of did this to start moving towards action. They started collecting some resources such as legislative representative contacts, food pantries, and started seeing themselves as agents of change. So I kind of touched on this briefly, but this is something that we utilized in the Resilience Ambassador program. On the left side of the screen, you'll see the CRC created wheel. And on the right side of the screen is the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. And I just wanted to highlight for a minute here a key distinguishment between these two tools that can be used for flood vulnerability assessment and resiliency planning. I don't want to go too in depth, but what you'll notice on the CRC wheel is that at the center of our concern is people. So we're really focusing in on how community well-being and people are affected by the issue of flooding. And then all the different colors surrounding people are different pathways of assessment. And under those, you'll see different data that you can interact with. So students were able to interact with the data for each pathway and kind of think about how each pathway could be used to assess vulnerability. But again, really highlighting how people are at the center of that. And then at the outside, you'll see economic, social, environmental, and political. These are kind of the broader forces that are constantly shaping and reshaping the way we understand flood vulnerability through each of these pathways. In juxtaposition, compared against the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, this is really focused on understanding assets. So it follows more of a sequential approach rather than this holistic approach where you're learning about assets in the community that are at risk and how those can be protected. And again, very linear model, very sequential. So just wanted to highlight some distinguishments between some of these tools. And I kind of touched on this earlier, but the distinction here is prescriptive versus processual approaches. We really wanted to stay committed to processual approaches that are more emergent and evolving, that highlight that flooding is contextual and nuanced, and allowed for high flexibility and collaboration across students. Oops, sorry, let me go back here. Yeah, whereas prescriptive approaches are more formalized and logical, rational, and structured with limited flexibility and often operate in a top-down approach. And what we noticed through the collection of pre and post survey results is that we asked a series of questions. I'm only going to draw out 2 examples for the sake of time and for this presentation, but we were asking students how they felt about their knowledge of community flood vulnerability. And at the beginning, you can kind of see they were in the red and yellow zone, expressing that they had little to an average amount of knowledge. And after participating in the program, they expressed that they had a good to great amount of knowledge. And then again, just highlighting confidence levels to use their knowledge and skills and capacities to contribute to climate resiliency. At the beginning, the majority of students feeling moderately comfortable and confident, and then by the end, most students expressed that they felt very confident. So these highlight 2 major takeaways of displaying trends of increased perceived knowledge related to the assessment of flood vulnerabilities, which then translated into increased confidence to apply said knowledge, skills, and capacities. And then this past February, on March 17th, actually, 6 of the students from the original program traveled to the West Virginia Capitol after ongoing engagement with the CRC to share some findings from a flood vulnerability assessment that they had conducted at the county level. And they were able to attend some meetings and talk to some legislators and other representatives to share what they had learned about flooding, why they were passionate about it, and really advocate for flood resiliency in West Virginia. And some closing thoughts of what we learned from this is that if we were aspiring to equip youth to have the capability, capacity, and confidence to contribute to the creation of climate resilient communities, it's important that we remain committed to processual approaches that really center on community well-being and holistic understandings through the use of appropriate tools in education and cycles of learning, action, and reflection. And I just wanted to quickly share a reflection from one of the students who participated in the program that I feel really represents our approach to flood resiliency, and I'm just going to quickly read it. The first sentence in this passage states, "At the center of our concern about flood resiliency is people," which is a powerful way to start. It emphasizes that we're not just thinking from a logistical standpoint or solely about community assets, but also about people who shape those assets. It highlights that vulnerability is best addressed by those within the vulnerable community. My biggest takeaway was that for a community to truly be resilient, we have to understand what resilience looks like for the people in that community. So I feel like that just really kind of summarizes our approach to in the Resilience Ambassador program and some of the things that the students learned when contributing to these efforts. And that's all I have. Thank you all so much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Kennedy. If you could just be sure to stop sharing so we could, perfect, jump over to our notes. And then Beverly, if you're able to pull those up. Perfect. Great. We have a handful of participants from a couple of different conservation organizations and several university scholars and educators. And so as we think about these questions, it'd be great to situate them within the individual experiences from these vastly different communities of practice. But maybe before doing that, jumping into these questions, open it up to a minute or two if anybody had any specific questions for Kennedy or Megan that then could continue to set the context for this larger conversation. Are there any questions?
Nico, hi, this is Ned. I'm just interested in did the processes and the two different tiers teach about group decision-making skills, kind of action research skills?
Kennedy, you want to take that?
Yeah, definitely. So in the program, for the Resilience Ambassador program, the entire thing was really team-based. So they were working in teams of 3 to generate their community maps. And the whole thing, like there were so many different moments throughout the program where they had to collaborate to make decisions. They all came in with individual community maps and then worked together to create a community map that represented all 3 perspectives of the students. So that whole thing was like a decision-making process. And then whenever we moved into the assessment, they were kind of thinking collectively of what are the key things we want to highlight? Where are places of priority in our community that need to be protected from flooding? So there were definitely notes of teamwork and decision making and collaboration sprinkled throughout all of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Ned. Thank you. Maybe I have time for one other short question.
This is Erin DeVries. I don't see if anyone else has their hand raised. Thanks for that presentation. Quick question. Were the group that worked on Tier 1, those youth, the same individuals that worked through the ambassador program? Sorry if I missed that in your presentations.
Megan, would you like to take that or should I
Yeah,
jump in?
I can take it. No, they were not. Ideally, that's the pathway in the future. This first iteration, we did separate pilots so that we could, as far as timing, get both of our pilots done within a year. This coming year, we have recruited the students that did participate in the classroom sessions to participate in the second iteration of the workshop. And then going forward, that would be the main pathway. They would be recruited through Tier 1 and then hopefully move into Tier 2 if they have interest.
Great. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much for the questions and answering those questions. So going back to the hopeful outcome of this roundtable is providing more insight about these 3 questions which I introduced earlier. These are also in the chat if you want to respond as well. But the first question is, what information do you, or I'll collectively say, do we need to advance flood resilience education? What we heard from the West Virginia crew is just one way of thinking about flooding and flood processes and flood challenges and responding to that. But do any of our participants have insights on what information is needed to advance the flood resilience education in your part of the Appalachians? And feel free to just turn off your mic under the anticipation that there's going to be a lot of contributions here from our participants. So you could just jump in.
Oh, I'll jump in. This is Erin again. I would love to see education around what implementation activities, I'll just call them, like dam removal and floodplain restoration, berm removal, that sort of thing can be taught, or maybe there's a group on here that's already doing that. I think that's important to move from resiliency. Got the places where we want to build resiliency. Now, how do we do that? And some of it's passive and some of it's super active, like removing dams and berms. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Erin. And when we were developing the PACT project here in West Virginia, we started thinking about about what excuse me, what the various potential solutions could be to these flood challenges, including the nature-based solutions. And it seems like the way we settled on that was there was quite a bit of variability on the effectiveness, and quite frankly, little research on the effectiveness of these other specifically nature-based solutions. But it seems that in the last 10 years, the evidence or, and the importance and understanding of dam removal certainly is there. So thank you for that. I think that's really important notion there. Michelle, see that your hand is up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for doing all this research. I'm certainly don't have expertise in education other than years on school board, but that's not the same. The schools around us, after the big flooding in Vermont in 2023, we got a lot of calls from teachers asking, could someone provide us a curriculum to help us explain to kids what's happening here? And it not high school age students necessarily, but elementary and middle school students who really maybe had been through the disaster, were affected personally, and they didn't know how to talk about it. So I think the work that you're doing would be super valuable just to empower teachers to have something. I had nothing to offer them other than, I could come talk to your class, but I don't think that is as helpful as them having something that they can draw from and keep coming back to over the months after something like that happens.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I think that's one of the challenges, in the aftermath of these big disruptions. We're all looking for people to help us understand that and to formalize that through education opportunities, especially with our youth, and then parlaying that into workforce development to help solve these problems, I think is where we need to go. This second question, and I think Michelle actually just touched on this, are what are your educational workforce training needs? Is there anything specific that other participants on the call would like to add in terms of, and actually Aaron alluded to this too, but any other insights on what your actual needs are? This could be from a data perspective, a theory perspective, demonstration projects, content.
Well, in terms of workforce, in terms of skills development, a lot of the issue is understanding the risk, to individuals, families, needs, building context, and so forth. There could be all sorts of investigations that small groups could undertake, just surveying a neighborhood and how high the building is off the ground and how high the flood water is coming, whether they have a basement or not, and the nature of the building, single, multifamily, commercial, what people have for options. There could be a lot of valuable information for the household adaptation ahead of time, and for the community understanding sampling of the kinds of risks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ned. It reminds me of when we heard from Jamie Shin and her collaborator on the West Virginia flood resilience framework, which had very detailed information on the kind of building level vulnerabilities and also adaptations that had taken place. So great point there. Does anybody else want to chime in here, have something to contribute?
I would say for workforce training, one thing that we really need help with is communications, people with effective communication skills. I think, we're coming from the ecological perspective, and I think there's been a big attitude in our field about, there's a lack of scientific literacy, and if only we could get the science across to people, they would understand it. And I think we need to learn from communications experts how to, you know, make our work relevant to people. And obviously with nature-based solutions to flood resilience, our work becomes very relevant, but how do we communicate that effectively is something that we're having a really hard time finding those skills.
Maybe I'll point to Kennedy and Grace. I see you're on the call as well, having joined the students at the state capitol. Could you speak to your experience related to Michelle's you know, need about having people being able to communicate this information, and you know, how meaningful was it for the folks that engaged with the youth at the capitol to hear from the youth themselves? Can you speak a little bit to that?
I'm happy to. It was really great because we kind of went into two meetings with two representatives and didn't necessarily have a clear plan for the students of how they were going to present the work. We just wanted them to have a conversation with these people and express like their concerns and advocate for some of the changes that they wanted. So we kind of opened up the conversation for them and invited them to share some of the things they learned. And it was amazing. It was like unprompted, they just went into this presentation mode where each of them took a turn to highlight the work that they did on the assessment and share some of their key concerns, and then also share what they thought could be done to address the concern. And I think for myself, I was really inspired by that because it was like we didn't need to practice their presentation or communication skills by building the confidence through the program. They felt like they had really good understandings of the work that they had done to effectively communicate that in a setting that might be intimidating for them to be talking to a local representative. And I think it was really well received too to see young high school students advocating for flooding because they're often not included in that conversation, let alone in spaces like political spaces, kind of in your face, sharing what they know and what changes they want to see. So people were really receptive to what they were sharing with them as well.
Yeah, and I think building off of what Kennedy was sharing, my name's Grace. I was also a part of the program and the development of some of the materials. And I think something that we learned is that having conversations about flooding or ecological scientific understandings of our physical landscape can be really complex. And it often can be really challenging to communicate with like our community members of like, this is why you should care about it. And so something that we learned through the process is that by focusing on why you care about your community and what you love about your community was a really easy entry point in order to get the conversation stirring, but also for our students and even other community members to feel like collaborators in the process. And that co-collaboration was really essential, and that like we can blend the scientific knowledge with local knowledge. And so by starting about learning what you love about your community and then breaking it into bite-sized pieces, such as what you saw on the wheel, made it really digestible. So by the time we got to the Capitol, the students were speaking from their heart and also were really easily able to connect like things about waterways and emergency services to what they knew about their region, because we started with that place of love and care.
Great, thank you for that. That's excellent. Beverly, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I wanted to see if I could draw Sherry Morse into the conversation because she has built up a program in Vermont that I think has some parallels to what you all have done in West Virginia. So Sherry, would you be interested in sharing just a little bit about what the Fellowships for Restoration Ecologies is all about, and if you're hearing things today that resonate with or maybe are at odds with what you're doing in your program?
Sure, thank you, and thanks for the presentations, and hello everyone. The name of our program is the Fellowship for Restoration Ecologies and Cultures. Something that's similar to what's happened in West Virginia is a equal focus on the ecological and the cultural, so that the human and the scientific. And our program is for undergraduate students. It's a 2-course sequence. in the field in a natural area that our university manages. Students meet with community practitioners. For many of them, that's the most like powerful thing element of the course is just meeting people doing the work. It really inspires them and brings them to that place of hope, which is another similarity with your project. Like everything that we do is, well, the program was initiated as a potential intervention in climate anxiety amongst undergrads coming out of COVID and a whole lot of separation. So it's built on cohort based. So they're the same small group of students the entire year, building relationship with practitioners and other faculty members, and doing their own, designing and doing their own restoration projects, culminating in a community day at the end of the year where we have not just academics and partners come in, but we have neighbors to our natural area and community members come and celebrate with us. And so all of that is hopefully building towards a sense of agency, which then is what provides students with a sense of hope. And not just hope, but like sort of like a very clear sense of what they want to do in terms of entering the workforce and a passion for that work. And the other component that we've added in, I think very successfully, is art. So we bring in artists, and when we go into the natural area, sometimes we're going in with watercolor paints, and sometimes we're going in with bug nets, and sometimes we're going in with loppers and weed wrenches to take out invasive species. So we treat art as sort of the third area besides social science and ecological sciences. That is like, yeah, the third leg of a stool for us.
Thanks a lot, Sherry. I'll just say, I'm going to pose one more question to one of our participants. I'll say if any of you are having thoughts, we welcome you to add them to the chat, and then I'm going to put up a poll at the end before we leave. I asked Reed Perkins from a small undergraduate institution in Illinois to come today because he has had a planning grant in the past and has now a new phase of a training grant, workforce development grant. And I wondered, Reed, if you could, like in a minute or two, just tell us what your planning process was like, supported by NSF, and if you have thoughts or guidance for us as we are essentially trying to build relationships around positioning ourselves for a next step.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. So I've actually been part of two planning grants. One is related to my work as through an STEM or Scholarships in STEM program. This is funded through DUE. Currently, as of whatever time it is today, we still have funding. So fingers crossed it continues. And the second is through a NOICE, which is a STEM education focused solicitation out of NSF DUE. So the planning grant process was really critical for both of those in order for us to identify what specifically we wanted to address our energies to fix. We all have a lot of expertise. We all have a lot of energy. We all have a lot of interest. The hardest part of the planning process is just to figure out who are we? What's the one target that we can all agree on is important. And for the STEM project, which I'm on, it was to target low income, which is a requirement of the solicitation, high ability students focused on STEM, specifically focused on STEM students post-graduation. So they can be pre-graduation when you're working with them, but the goal is to get them into the STEM workforce. So it's essentially a workforce development project that we are working on. And for that, we're doing this fairly standard things of developing mentoring programs, pre-placement workplace skill sets development. We're giving them internships, research programs, all of those to try to build their skills as they identify them. So for us, to Beverly's question, the planning process was critical. If we didn't have a planning process going into that, we would not have nearly the success that we're having now. And both the NOICE, which I'm not directly part of, I'm on the advisory committee, and the STEM, which I'm the PI on that. So I don't know if that helps, but that's probably my 1 minute.
That helps me a lot, because I think as I have been trying to steer our group and provide guidance and so on, I'm constantly navigating, what are we doing here? And so I'll just say to all of you, particularly those of you who've joined us repeatedly, if it feels like we're like touching different parts of the elephant, we're not quite sure what we're touching, Reed has been reassuring me that that's actually what a planning grant is about. That's why the National Science Foundation gives teams money and time to do planning.
Yep.
So you actually put together a project that's engaged with partners, you know, can get to that, in this case, the CHIRP pillars of Earth system science advances, but true stakeholder engagement and a solutions orientation.
Let me just quickly, can I quickly add, I know you got to close out, but
yeah.
NSF didn't always give planning grants. The planning grant program or programs at NSF really arose out of the recognition by NSF that these multidisciplinary complex projects really did not deliver well. And so they recognized that people needed some time, some funded time to develop a coherent, concrete target to address. So and so I'm just pointing out that the planning grant as a funding mechanism was not always the case. It came out of a recognition that it was needed by the community in order to develop more coherent and more effective funded programs.
That's super helpful. Thanks a lot. We are at 3:30. I really appreciate, I would say I probably speak for Rob and Nico also, appreciate everyone's time today. There's a link in the chat for a poll. We've been using a poll every month to just get some takeaway input. So we'll invite you to, if you've got a minute, just click on the link in the chat for the poll and send us any thoughts you have. We are wrapping up this series of roundtables. This was the last one we had planned for the spring. Our group is going to go into some pretty intensive planning work this summer, including bringing a few participants from Pennsylvania, West Virginia up to Vermont, and then in September, sending a few from Vermont down to West Virginia. And our goal by the end of the summer is to send everyone who's joined these roundtables a summary of what we've learned. And to Reed's point, and continue to engage those who are willing in this planning effort over the next year and a half. So thank you again for joining us.